Surely we understand now the tension around geopolitics is getting more uncertain and also more unpredictable. For example, look at the social media post, especially from the Canadian Prime Minister. He posted a strong but a straightforward message regarding the relationship between US and Canada at this moment. Now, a portion of the letter says, and I quote, "Over the past 18 months, Canada's new government has focused on building our strength at home, diversifying our partnership abroad, and striking a fair deal with the US. We also recognize from the beginning that America has changed, that we will not return to our old relationships. Our government understood before many that America is altering its old trade relationships," end quote. And surely we understand that not only just Canada, but also many other countries today are asking questions regarding the liability and also the accountability of the US government. But meanwhile, we still need to talk about the war between US and Iran at this moment. As we talked to the expert many times, sitting US President Donald Trump has been rather vocal, especially on social media, regarding the ongoing war. But however, it seemed to be the truth that the Iranian side has been silenced, and quite frankly, we really don't know what the next step could be. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished guest, Professor Jamsheed Choksy. Professor Choksy is a distinguished professor. He's the former chair of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures, former chair of the Department of Central Eurasia Studies. He's currently the director of Inner Asia and Uralic National Resource Center at the Indiana University at Bloomington. Well, Professor Choksy, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Will. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Professor. Such an honor to have you back on the program. Now, Professor Choksy, before we talk about US and Iran, which, trust me, will be rather fascinating, but let's talk about the message directly from the Canadian office and regarding the strong statement, especially I mentioned in the intro. It says the US government, or right now America, has changed, that we as the Canadian government will not return to our old relationships, putting tariffs on the closest allies and charging for access to its vast market, end quote. Professor Choksy, we know that you are not an economist, but looking at the strategy from sitting US President Donald Trump to Canada and also to many other countries, especially within the NATO allies, how do you think that such message could actually wake up the US president, or perhaps more people start to understand that the old relationships are gone and we should get ready for something new? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say one shouldn't. I think that, when we look at politicians and what they say and do, quite often it tends to be hyperbolic. So a lot of rhetoric that exaggerates. So I would not argue that the relationship between the United States and Canada has fundamentally changed, or that the relationship between the United States and the NATO allies have fundamentally changed. I think what we are seeing is some shifting, some resettling. Also keep in mind that with all the governments we're talking about, these governments do change over. So President Trump's term will end in 2 years. The Canadian Prime Minister will also move on. We see this happen in Europe on a regular basis. I think what we will see endure are the fundamental relationships. There is a fundamental relationship between the United States and Canada. It's visible as on both sides of the border. The countries are very similar in many ways. Economically, they're bound. And so the current kerfuffles, I think, will pass in time. Likewise, with NATO, I think what we are seeing is a rebalancing. Yes, the United States for a long time took the lead in not just militarily, but economically. Now we are seeing a more balance. And in fact, there are many leaders in NATO, including NATO generals, who do feel that indeed what is happening in some ways is very good for the European countries, so that they are forced to take up their responsibility. Let me give you one sort of example. When I talk with colleagues who are, shall we say, in Western Europe, and there is always the background fear, both in Western and Eastern Europe, that the Russians may come back in. And so the question has always been, oh, well, if a European country can hold out for about 3 days, then the Americans will come to the rescue. The question is, why should a country be A, dependent on someone else coming to their rescue, but B, why would you want to be dominated by or taken over by a foreign country for 3 days and then try to push them out? So I think what we're seeing is a reconfiguration, and we don't know the outcome, of course. But it is quite possible that the long-term outcome will actually be more beneficial. So let's say we have no idea. I think the more important aspect here is ultimately does all this lead to a more stable, more open world?
Well, Professor Choksy, let's get to our main conversation regarding the war between US and Iran. I am looking at an article came out of the New York Times, and the title says, as Iran and US settle into an uneasy standoff, who will blink first? So for weeks that we believe that there are not seriously negotiation or they're not actually shooting each other, but instead Iran and the US have settled into an uneasy in-between state that risks either a return to fighting or a hardening stalemate. You and I, we had a brief discussion before taping the show. Clearly that we understand sitting US President Donald Trump is still in the driver's seat from the US side. But meanwhile, when we look at the Iranian side, I guess the first question we need to talk about, or Professor would love for you to share, is who is actually in control in the Iranian government, because that's really made the conversation even harder. It's like having a conversation with AI. I know I am talking, but on the other side, I don't even know if I'm talking to a machine or I am just having this wishful thinking that someone having conversation with me. Call me a lunatic, call me crazy, but I think in the war, it has to come to a face-to-face interaction. What do you say to that?
And that, Will, I think is one of the most perplexing issues here. In the past, in Iran, when a politician has died or been assassinated, and that has happened before, it was just most recently, the then president of Iran died in a helicopter crash coming back from the Caucasus. So, and there's a replacement. And the replacement is seen in public. In this case, we have the third supreme leader is, shall we say, in occultation. And in fact, in Shiism, the main form of Islam in Iran, there is the notion of the hidden of the 12th Imam, the 12th descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, who supposedly will return at the end of time, who's being kept hidden by the deity from the enemies. And there's much of, shall we say, background chatter among the Iranian public that what's happening here in Iran is something like that right now, that the new supreme leader is in occultation, sending messages, but no one knows, yes, is he alive? Is he incapacitated? Is he fully aware? Is he fully running the show? That is completely unclear. And so that is one major barrier. What seems, however, also to be happening at the same time in Iran is the rise of a military junta. And that when we look at the changes that are occurring, the so-called appointments, are these really appointments by the supreme leader, or is this what we're seeing is more and more military people taking over? We're seeing the elected officials like the President Pezeshkian essentially coming to have less and less of a role. The people who seem to be rising to power are the old military hardliners, not of the regular army, not of the regular Air Force or Navy, but of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the people who rose initially to prominence in the 1980s in the war between Iran and Iraq. So it seems that those individuals who are now in their 70s are other individuals who are able to are taking over. So it's not clear, and of course there seems to be infighting there as well. So the fundamental question is, yes, who can the United States negotiate with? Is the Iranian government speaking with one voice? It does not appear to be so. It also seems that whenever we are close to a resolution, then leaving aside President Trump's bellicose statements, of which he talks and then shifts every day, but what we do see is that as when we are close to some kind of resolution, some I would almost say some faction within the Iranian military command fires a missile at one of its neighbors, jeopardizing the talks. So yes, that is a major question, and until a clear leadership emerges in Iran, we may not have a resolution to the war.
Professor Choksy, I want to keep the conversation going. Again, according to the latest report, it says for weeks, Iran has been negotiating with Omar over the future management of the strait. But the list of demands suggests that even in the event of a deal, Iranian forces would continue to threaten attack transiting marine traffic. And also, based on the message from President Trump, that there's a possibility the U.S. it's interested or not interested, a possibility that President Trump says threatened to bomb Oman, which has been in talks with Iran about a solution to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. When we look at the reality, regardless what's happening right now, I think the fundamental question for everyone to think about the war between US and Iran is who is actually still in charge of the Strait of Hormuz. Because again, when we look at the President Trump's message, I understand the politics. I understand it's a midterm election season coming up, and the rhetoric can be crazy or can be irrational sometimes. But President Trump kept on saying that US it's in control, and sooner or later, US is going to take over the strait. It's going to become the US property. But on the other hand, Iranians said they are in charge of the strait. They are in charge of the territory. Professor Choksy, I am not asking for a solution. Trust me, I'm not asking to open this magic box. But I think for all the countries, when we talk about this global economy, we have to have one answer. Well, we have to have one reliable or solid answer for us is, what is happening to the Strait of Hormuz? And why are both sides keep on claiming the territory when we are not seeing anything practical on the ground? Go ahead.
And that is part of the central problem. That is, the strait has two countries on either side, Iran and Oman. In the past, ships have sailed through. Iran had long threatened that they would close the strait. And in a sense, I think as we have discussed previously on this show, it is possible for any country in that region to close the strait because it's a narrow strait of water. And of course, the way you close it is as soon as you attack one or two ships, then the underwriters who provide the insurance for those ships pull back the insurance. The sailors who work on the ships don't want to get killed. So as long as any country there, it's not just Iran. Oman could make the same threat. The Saudis, the Qataris, the Bahrainis, the Emiratis, the Pakistanis outside there. I mean, this could be never ending, and Iran is playing this game. And of course, unlike what Iran does is periodically it takes a shot at one or two passing vessels. So in that sense, Iran is, shall we say, if not controlling, they are holding the ships in the region hostage. On the other hand, the United States is also on the outside the Persian Gulf, outside the Strait of Hormuz, embargoing all Iranian ships coming in and out. So that has reached in some ways a stalemate. However, it does appear that stalemate is breaking. In other words, Iran still is able to attack vessels. But all the reports that we are gradually seeing indicates that, yes, it is small numbers, but the US is able to get small numbers of oil tankers out. On the other hand, Iranian tankers are not getting out. And so it appears that in the long run, the momentum is shifting away. It's also interesting that most recently, we've had Iranian politicians publicly threaten their neighbors because what the Iranians are afraid of is that their own action will rebound on them. Namely, that they may end up making the Strait of Hormuz irrelevant. Because in the meantime, what is happening is the Iraqis and the Kuwaitis are working with the Syrians to send the oil across Syria to the Mediterranean. The Saudis are finding ways into the Red Sea and through the Suez Canal. The Emiratis, of course, have a direct connection out to the Arabian Sea. So, yes, it is taking time, but what we're seeing is most of the countries in the region are adapting. Iran, however, has no real practical way of selling its oil and gas other than through the Strait. So while it can threaten others, the United States is out there in the Arabian Sea to threaten Iran. And so Iranian oil sales are dropping. So yes, this waiting game, as you said, who will blink first is the New York Times question, right? And that is part of the question. Will Donald Trump blink first, or will the Iranians blink first? Now, the Iranian government may not blink first only because it is increasingly a military dictatorship. The United States is, despite all Donald Trump's rhetorics, a free and open society in which, yes, there are going to be elections. And Donald Trump may very well take a pounding. He may not, but he may. So that's the unclear aspect. But I think what we're beginning to see with the Strait of Hormuz is that ultimately, this cannot go on forever. The markets are going to find ways to get around it. And the long term loser will be Iran.
Well, Professor Choksy, I got two more questions before letting you go. Now, recently, the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said in an interview that his department planned to apply measures that, quote, have never been seen in the history of the economic isolation of a country. If we understand the words correctly, what Scott Bessent has said, it's regarding the sanctions or this economic pressure on Iran. Professor, you and I, we had so many conversations and regarding the sanctions. But again, today we still need to ask the question that because experts believe that Iran will try to transfer the resulting economic pain onto its population for as long as possible. Meanwhile, they believe that Washington will blink first. So, Professor, from your perspective, at this moment, I'm not saying that we should definitely believe what the U.S. Treasury Secretary said, but also we cannot deny how the Iran will respond to this. So why do you think that today the sanctions or economic pressure still can be the factor to change the outcome of the war, or perhaps might not change what the U.S. has anticipated or expected? What do you say to that?
Will new sanctions directly change the outcome of the war? Probably not. There have been mounting sanctions against Iran for over 4 decades. The Iranian government has found workarounds. And yes, the Iranian government has always passed the pain onto its population. The sanctions in the past have also always had waivers to allow other countries to buy Iranian oil, etc. Iran has found ways to come up with alternate financial networks, etc. So one question will be, can the US now actually break those unconventional economic networks that Iran has developed? If it is successful, and it is indeed able to ramp up the economic pressure, and some of it is happening. Iran's oil sales have actually dropped, and we are seeing that in fact, Iran's embargo in the Gulf has resulted in Iran actually exporting less and less oil and gas. So the Iranian government is feeling more and more pain. The Iranian people are feeling the pain. The question is, will the US actually be able to keep this up? If it does, at what point will the Iranian government no longer be able to control its own population? And certainly, one outcome to the war in the Gulf may not be a military outcome. If the United States is indeed able to impose truly crippling sanctions on the Iranian government, it may accomplish what, shall we say, this war was supposed to be at the beginning. Remember, Will, the discussion at the beginning of the war was that a war would help the Iranian people rise up against its despotic regime and create a free and open society, which would then reintegrate with the world. That never happened. The government has doubled down on its population. The question is, can the economic pressure rise to such a level that the government is no longer able to pay its own supporters? It loses its own supporters, and then the majority population, in desperation, overthrows the government. That is the great unknown. How long it could take, we don't know. The estimates are it usually is about 4 to 6 months, and that is politically a long time.
Well, Professor Choksy, I want to ask the last question. Again, when we talk about the war between US and Iran at this moment, in addition to everything we talk about, at the end of the day, we still need to come back to the fundamental question, is the role of leadership. And we know that today, when we look at President Trump, look at the way and the strategies that he took, a lot of people start to say regarding this presidential power and also the authorization of the Congress. We know, you and I, we talk about this many times, the midterm election is coming up. And people are still very much interested in knowing either the results after the election, or perhaps right now, Congress should step in, should continue to help, or have the discussion regarding the war between US and Iran. Ultimately, the goal is we want to end the war. No one would like to continue this because it has drained so much economic pressure upon the citizens in the US and also around the world. So my last quick question to you, Professor Choksy, is do you think it's still too late to talk about this Congress power or this authorization to the president to negotiate or perhaps continue to negotiate with Iran and avoid bigger clashes? How do you think we should understand this complication at this moment? Because again, we don't want president to repeat the same mistake over and over again. But there has to be some type of, I don't want to use the word warning, but some type of strategies in order to make better deals or to make better decisions. Your final thoughts.
And that is the fundamental question, I think, within the United States. Because of the nature of the American political system, it is a very balanced system. As we can see, the Congress is divided. It's divided along political lines, ideological lines, economic lines. And so the question is, will the midterm election deliver the Congress in large enough numbers to one or another party that Congress can provide us clarity? That is unclear. I mean, right now, and I am not an internal American strategist. I don't, I only know the public polls. It would appear that the American public is very much divided and the Congress is divided. And so it is not clear that the midterm elections will provide a Congress that is sufficiently empowered in terms of sheer number of representatives elected to be able to fundamentally change presidential edicts. In other words, you do need the Congress to have overriding powers, and that may not occur. So what we may see is that we are in for another 2 years of an American president who very much changes his mind on a daily basis. And of course, that is not good strategy for the United States or for the world, but that is what we are in for, at least in the near future, I think. Where that will leave Iran, of course, is unclear. Now, on the one hand, Will, knowing and having a stable strategy can be beneficial, but it can also be a handicap. On the other hand, having what appears to be erratic strategy can be strategically very viable. In other words, you leave your enemy unclear and guessing. So we don't know that outcome. We don't know the outcome of the war with Iran, but I think we are beginning to see some shifts. We're seeing the Europeans now talking about and mastering capabilities of trying to control, also be involved in control of the Gulf. We're seeing the Gulf countries now stepping up. So I think what we may see in the long run, not immediately, but over the next 6 months, I think we may be seeing a resolution to this. And certainly the energy markets seem to be moving forward.
Well, again, I do want to end our conversation by reading something special. The other day, I came across a beautiful description, and it came from the former US President Lyndon Johnson. And this is what he said when people ask about America, especially in the midst of uncertainty and the midst of complication. And I quote, "Our beautiful America was spilled by a nation of strangers. From 100 different places or more, they have poured forth into an empty land, joining and blending in one mighty and irresistible tide. The land flourished because it was fed from so many sources, because it was nourished by so many cultures and traditions and peoples," end quote. And I believe today, regardless we're seeing this political polarization or this economic uncertainty or even the war between US and Iran, but ultimately the world needs America and the world needs sanity. And I do believe, again, Professor, you agree with me, that no war should bring additional pressure upon people. And we need to really bring the dialogue to the table and truly understand that dividers are not going to work. We need unifiers. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to speak to Professor Jamsheed Choksy. Professor Choksy is a distinguished professor. He's currently the director of the Inter-Asia and Uralic National Resource Center at Indiana University at Bloomington. Well, Professor, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I would love to have you back on the show as we continue to pay attention to the global affairs. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you very much.